Angie's the queen of the valley, let's put it that way. So she's doing what everybody else here in town is doing, she's doing out in the Fraser Valley. And I think, from everything I've been to out there, your name comes up every single time. So that means you're doing something right. And you're educating everybody out there who doesn't get in the city every day, and you've got your store and you've got everything else going out there. So besides the store, which I'm sure Angie will talk about, she's also the queen of barbecue, because that's a whole other ballgame. And that's one thing I've done. And she has a barbecue at the bypass out in Langley every year. And I've judged the pie competition out there, and I've been out there for lots of meat and stuff. So Angie's been on the scene for a long time in Vancouver as well, also in very different capacities. I want to welcome Angie to speak.
Thank you. Queen of the Valley, no pressure at all there. Is there anybody else here from the Fraser Valley? I know Tina. Oh my God, my people. Thank you for whipping out your passport and showing up tonight. I totally appreciate it. I hear from so many people, you're out in Langley. Why are you so far away? People live in Langley. They need food there too. We have no lazy gourmet in Langley. We need food in Langley. People in Langley want to eat. It actually breaks my heart that so much of the food that we eat is raised and produced in the Fraser Valley, and every day I watch it get on trucks and leave the Fraser Valley. And it comes into Vancouver, and unfortunately in the Fraser Valley we don't have very much access to that food, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So thank you, Richard, for having me here tonight. I can't believe I have to follow you guys. When I saw the list, I was like, oh my gosh, how can I get out of this? And I thought, why would I want to get out of this? I get to do the coolest things every single day. Who else gets to be here doing this today? It's amazing. The places I find myself, the opportunities I have, and much like Maru, why say no? What's the worst that'll happen? I do all kinds of ridiculous things all the time. I was at an event recently where I was speaking at a Canadian Chamber of Commerce event in Hamilton, and I realized my shirt had been completely misbuttoned all day. I was speaking at this conference, and nobody told me. How do you not tell somebody their shirt isn't done up properly? How do you walk around like that all day? But that's not the only time that's happened. I was at another event recently and realized when I looked down, because I thought I'd spilled something on my sleeve during lunch, only to realize something was wrong with my shirt, probably because it had been on inside out all day. So I don't know how, if you see me and I'm wearing something inside out, my dress is tucked into my pantyhose, please tell me. Please tell me. Stop me in the street. I'm asking you right now. Please just tell me. It's much like the friend who's got the food in the teeth that you never say. Why? Tell them they have food in their teeth. They want to know. So much like Richard was saying earlier, I love being in the Fraser Valley, and I wasn't always in the Fraser Valley. I used to work and live in Vancouver. I worked for many years in food production. I worked for large-scale food manufacturers, and I traveled all over Canada and the US selling food. And some of the food I sold was very high quality, organic, locally produced food. And prior to that, the food I sold was less organic, less high quality. And I spent a lot of time calling on conventional retail stores. I managed food service distribution for a company, and I managed retail distribution for a company. And I spent a lot of time calling on people like Costco and Safeway, and realized pretty quickly that there was only a few manufacturers who actually were selling food into those places. And I realized the more time I spent in those stores and the harder I had to work to sell them the food I was selling, there weren't a lot of choices in the markets. Everything that's on the shelves in Safeway is controlled by a handful of companies. And it's really quite frightening to think that it's all the same food, just packaged differently. And I was working at the time for an organic food company, and we were struggling so hard to fight for retail shelf space against conventional food manufacturers, and we were just a little company. We didn't have huge amounts of money to write checks for listing fees and free fills that the supermarkets want you to have. It costs a fortune just to have your very first order of product sent into that store, so they will have the privilege of selling your product for you. And if your product doesn't sell, as quickly as they think it should or at high enough margin, they'll just take it off. And it's too bad. Sorry, thanks, but we're not interested anymore. And I realized pretty quickly that we were getting fewer and fewer choices in the market for food. And I don't want to wake up one day and not have any choices. I don't want to wake up one day and the only restaurant that's open be McDonald's. That scares the hell out of me. So I started thinking about what I could do to sort of maybe make food a little more accessible to people. And being a small food producer, the hardest thing for us was to find an outlet to sell our food. We heard every day, your food is so good, we love your food, where can we buy it? We shop at Safeway. Well, you can't buy it at Safeway because we can't afford to do business with Safeway. So we had to foster and develop a whole bunch of relationships with small independent food stores. And that's where those relationships were formed, and we had a ton of success, much like you, building a business sort of from the ground up and making those connections with the people, with the food. And for me, having an opportunity to sell to companies like Capers when they were still Capers, before they were Whole Foods, really gave an opportunity for some small-scale food producers to have an outlet to sell their food. Because without an outlet to sell their food, there's no need to make that food. And so all of those small-scale food producers would eventually just go away. And then we'd have no choices again. So I think that the part of what drew me to the Valley was to get away from the conventional food business, selling food into supermarkets and that constant grind of trying to get listings in Costco and trying to get listings in Safeway. But I wanted to make food more accessible to people. I wanted to give small-scale food producers a place to sell their food because they were running out of places to sell their food. So I opened Well Seasoned, and I opened Well Seasoned 9 years ago. We're based in Langley, and one of my biggest objectives when I opened my store was to provide producers with a place to sell their food. If you could buy that food at Safeway or Superstore, you wouldn't find it at my store. I only wanted to carry independent, real food. To this day, probably 75 or 80% of the food I sell in my store, I can tell you the first name of the person who made it. I can tell you the person who grew the olives. I can tell you the name of the person who baked the crackers. So it's personal for me. And it was important for me to sort of help these food producers find that outlet so that they could eventually sustain their businesses and create the life that they were trying to create through food and how they relate to people. So kind of like we've heard already, I mean, food is who you are. Growing up, that was how my family talked to each other. I don't think we went through, if we had 2 meals at our house a week where somebody wasn't passing milk through their nose, that would have been a record. That's how my family talked to each other. It was the only time we saw each other. We sat down every night and we had a meal together. And it wasn't always a good meal. Sometimes it was a tuna fish sandwich. Sometimes it was a can of tomato soup. But we always sat down and had that meal together. And unlike you guys, I don't come from a family of great cooks. I lived with my grandparents when I was small, and my grandfather fried bologna professionally. That was a staple at our house. That's what we ate when I was little. I remember one of the first times I was able to cook when I was small, my grandmother propped me up on this little wooden stool in front of the stove. And I had it in my head that if you could make Rice Krispie treats with melted marshmallows, why couldn't you just add a whole bunch of other stuff in there instead of the Rice Krispie treats and have a different kind of treat? So she let me put the most ridiculous crap in melted marshmallows. I remember standing over this pot of bubbling marshmallows. You've cooked it before. It's like lava jumping out of the pot. Oh yeah, I'm adding like raw apples to the molten marshmallows, and she's just letting me do my thing. This is my creative outlet. Well, those marshmallows never set up like a Rice Krispie treat. I mean, the liquid in the apples totally changed the structure, and we never ate a proper Rice Krispie treat at my house. I remember going to my grandmother's house and walking in the front door, and you probably all have very similar memories walking in the door, and it's that food that your grandmother cooked on Sunday, you know, the roast dinner, the leg of lamb, No, we walked into my grandmother's and I'd be like, what is that smell? Well, I'm making lasagna. Really? It doesn't smell like, yeah, I didn't have any tomatoes. So it's raw noodles, ground beef, and cheese. All right. So, probably some melted marshmallow thing for dessert. So that sort of motivated me to learn a little bit more about food and sort of discover where food came from and how it was grown. And regardless of what the food tasted like or what it smelled like, we all sat down and we all ate it. And we didn't always love the food, but we always loved the people that we were with. And to this day, that's how I talk to people, is with food. And so bringing the opportunity that was sort of presented to me to give small-scale food producers an opportunity to showcase their product, as well as for me to talk to my customers about those people and their stories, and then my story of growing up and cooking and learning how to put food on the table for my friends and family was really important. And so I opened Well Seasoned. We're a specialty food store and a cooking school in Langley. We have 2 classrooms, and we have chefs that come from all over the place to teach classes. And a lot of our chefs are not big fancy chefs from downtown Vancouver. Some of them are. Karen teaches occasionally, but they're real people who just have a passion for food, much like you, who just want to share that love of food with the people that they have an opportunity to talk to. In our cooking school, we don't have one chef that teaches everything. My sushi chef is really Japanese, and that's all he does. He just teaches sushi. He has Monday nights off from his restaurant, and he comes to my place and teaches people how to make sushi. Tina, our pastry chef, she's not a big fancy restaurant chef. She's a super dedicated, hardworking mother who just wants to show people how to bake better, how to put better food on the table. So for me, it was a great opportunity to do all of that and highlight some food producers that were based or not based in the Fraser Valley. So as the business has grown, we still really have a huge focus on small-scale food producers. I look for them constantly. I'm at markets and shows, and I'll always take an appointment from somebody calling to talk about a new product. There's so many great things on the market, and it's so great to hear from people what their passion is and how that product started. Just like Ben and her lolly cakes. I mean, it's so fun, but I'm sure there's a really great story about how that evolved and how you decided you could make such a fun product. So there's tons of people out there like that are super interesting, that I'm happy and so fortunate every day to be able to relay their story on their behalf to my customers. Sort of partway through my career in food sales, I used to travel a lot, and I met a woman a really long time ago named Natalie Dupree. And she's a Southern Belle. She's a true Southern Belle. Natalie, I attended a cooking class because I was traveling so much, and I think I was in Atlanta, and I attended a cooking class with a woman called Natalie Dupree, and she made Southern food, and it was like, oh my God, I've never eaten anything like that before in my life. A fresh praline and fried chicken, and just like real home cooking Southern food. And a light went on for me during that trip, and I realized that there were so many great people out there who weren't really well known, who didn't have huge sort of food careers, kind of like the Galloping Gourmet, that just weren't very high profile people that were doing really amazing things with food. And so I took that class with Natalie, and I went home and practiced making pralines and had some miserable failures over and over and over again. But the time I spent in the South and learning a bit about Southern food really taught me a little bit about barbecue. And I came back to Canada, and I opened my store. And shortly after I opened my store, a cookbook author named Ron Shuchuk just released a brand new cookbook called Barbecue Secrets. For those of you who don't know him, Rockin' Ronnie Shuchuk lives in North Vancouver. He's a good old Ukrainian kid from Alberta. And I mean, really, what did he know about barbecue? Probably not very much when he started either. And I picked up Ron's cookbook, thinking, this would be a good extension to what Natalie had taught me. And I read the book, and I read it first before I started cooking, because it's pretty labor intensive. It's not something you just start doing for, throw a brisket on for 14 hours. It just takes a little bit of planning. So I read the book, and I called Ron, and I invited him to come out to my cooking school to teach people how to barbecue. Well, we all think barbecue in Canada is throwing a burger on the grill or, grilling a steak. That is not barbecue. That is not Southern style barbecue. That's grilling, and that's what we do in Canada. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just totally different than Southern style barbecue. So Ron came out and he taught a class on slow cooking, low and slow. Southern style barbecue is always done with wood and charcoal. And so Ron taught people how to do this. And I couldn't believe how amazing this food was. It was the ultimate way for me to talk to people. You have 14 hours to cook this brisket. You know how much conversation you can have? You can drink a lot of wine in 14 hours. And so I sort of started stalking Ron a little bit, and I wanted to learn all of his secrets, and I wanted to find out what he was doing. So he eventually felt sorry for me and invited me to come to a barbecue competition so I could learn some of his secrets and the things that weren't in the book. And he made me an honorary butt shredder. And that was the name of his team. And I still have my apron, the butt shredder apron. I love it. And so I learned from Ron all about low and slow cooking, all about traditional Southern style barbecue, from a Ukrainian guy from Edmonton who knew that would be the catalyst for Canadian barbecue. And so I started competing with Ron. And eventually I thought, I don't need him anymore. I'm better than that. I don't need him. These boys are slowing me down. So I needed to break out and do my own thing. So with some coaching from some of the people I'd met along the way, I started my own competition barbecue team. And I'm like one of the only women in Canada. I think there's 3 of us who do this. And it's just the most ridiculous hobby in the whole world. You don't get any money for it unless you're really good and competing in the US. It's just this crazy hobby, but it's this whole culture of food that brings all of these people together, and you've got nothing but time sitting around waiting for the food to cook. It's the most social kind of food I've ever experienced in my life. And so starting back when I took that class from Natalie in Atlanta, and then having an opportunity to spend some time with Ron, and then ultimately learning how to do my own thing and barbecue. I was thinking when Karen was talking about how there's no mentors for women in the business. And I don't think that's right, Karen. I just think there's a lot of women who are mentors who don't necessarily know they're mentors for other women. And I think, Karen, you've been a great mentor to tons of different chefs and people in the industry that aren't necessarily chefs in the industry. And Marie, I know you are a tremendous mentor for women in the community, and people look up to you that you don't know you, but they see you and they see what you're doing. And I think there is a tremendous amount of mentorship. And Susan, you're talking about you being the first person with a fax machine. I mean, everybody was emulating what you were doing at the time, and you probably didn't realize at the time what a mentor you were to all of the women that either worked for you or worked in the industry with you. And so I think there's a lot of women in the industry who are mentors, who have mentored me, but I maybe haven't taken the time to tell them how incredible they are and what an impact they had on my life. So several years ago, I had the good fortune to be invited to join a group called Les Dames d'Escoffier, and they're a Vancouver-based organization. And several years ago, I also had the very good fortune to travel representing the group to Atlanta, where Natalie Dupree was being honored by Les Dames d'Escoffier International with the Grand Dame Award, which is like the queen of the world sort of thing, queen of my world. And from me, before I opened my store, when I was traveling, selling food, to some random hotel in Atlanta, when I found this cooking class with Natalie, took the cooking class, it sort of changed the way I thought about food. And then to go through this whole process of learning how to cook, Southern style barbecue, opening my store, and it's a struggle. I mean, it has not been easy. You think it's a struggle downtown Vancouver? You should try waving that flag by yourself out in the Fraser Valley. At least here you had some comrades trying to help you wave that flag. It's a little more challenging out in the Fraser Valley. So I went back to Atlanta, and Natalie was there, and she had no idea for all these years that she had mentored me, that one class I took and then the second class the next time I went back, she had no idea that changed my life. So I had a tremendous opportunity in Atlanta just 2 years ago to tell her that, when she was being honored at this conference, to tell her what an impact she had on my life. And I mean, it was a big night for her. She was, busy with flashbulbs going off, and it really is a big deal. And so I probably got 5 minutes of her time. But after the conference that night, everybody was so excited, and it was such a great event. So the next day I sent her an email, and I just said, oh my God, like, I haven't seen you in 25 years. I had no idea that you were being honored, and it was just so amazing because it all sort of came back home. But she had no idea who I was. I mean, why would she? She didn't remember me. But I introduced myself, and the next day I just sent her an email and said, you don't know this, but this is the kid who grew up eating lasagna with no tomato sauce. You taught me about food, and you flipped that light on for me, and it made a huge difference in my life. So I think, Karen, when you were talking earlier about no mentors, I think people just maybe don't tell people that they're their mentor. So I think maybe you're feeling a little underappreciated, and you shouldn't be, because I think a lot of people...
No, it's like I didn't have any mentors.
You didn't?
But there was people I worked with along the way that were fantastic. I learned a lot from, but there was nobody that took me under their wing.
Right.
And said, you're being an idiot, or, this is good. You know what I mean?
Right.
That kind of thing that I've done for other people. I didn't have that. Yeah.
Maybe not in the same way, but I think you had it maybe in snippets, like I did.
Yeah. Nuggets from various sources.
That was enough to kind of keep you clawing forward and carrying on. So after I had the opportunity to talk to Natalie, it was pretty amazing, because for me it was an opportunity to kind of reflect on where I came from and how I ended up where I am. And like I said earlier, being out in the Fraser Valley and sort of waving that flag on my own for the last 9 years has been really hard. There's not a big culinary scene out in the Fraser Valley. There's not a lot of great restaurants. They love a chain restaurant in the Fraser Valley. I think people in Langley's heads are about to explode because Cactus is coming. And I'm not kidding. Like, they're dying to get at the Cactus Club. Which, I mean, great. Don't get it. Anyhow, so there was, like I said earlier, every day I watch these trucks leave the Fraser Valley with all this food on it. I know tons of food producers in the Fraser Valley. I know every kind of food producer you can imagine. And if they want to sell their food, they have to send it into Vancouver. And, Trout Lake Market, Kitsilano Market, all of these markets, the food comes from the valley, and we have no outlet for our farmers in the valley. So 4 years ago, I worked really hard with a group of people from Kwantlen University to start the Langley Community Farmers Market. And yay, we have a market now. So I'm happy to report that with a whole bunch of volunteers and a bunch of hard work and a bunch of passion and committed vendors who were willing to say, yes, I'll lose money for a year or two and I'll come and support your market, and let's figure out how to sell this food in the Fraser Valley. And now we have a market that's been open for, I think, 3 weeks this season. We had 40 vendors at our market last Wednesday, and it's a true make it, bake it, grow it farmers market. It's not a craft market, it's a true farmers market. So for me, it's just having an opportunity to continue to get real food to real people. And if I can just encourage one person to eat something real that's made by somebody whose name they know, it's really important to me. I see all these parents, and I don't have children, so I don't mean to be judgmental, but I see all these parents in their Fraser Valley minivans with their soccer outfits on, and they're just stuffing kids' faces with burgers. And there has to be a better way. There has to be a better way. And so I thought, if we open this cooking school and we have this opportunity to show people how to make food and understand where their food comes from, and we have the farmers market, and it's just sort of this perfect food storm out in the Fraser Valley. So it's coming together, and there's people obviously who support the farmers market and appreciate the work that we do. But for me, it's just about connecting people with their food. And I feel really lucky to get to do all this kind of stuff every day. And I thank you for having me here. My story isn't nearly as fascinating as Mariu's or Susan's. And truthfully, I was told on the drive here, one of my staff said, "Do not drop the F-bomb." Well, hello? Now I'm trying to figure out how to work it in. So thank you for having me. You women are a phenomenal inspiration to me. And I thank you for everything you've done to help all of us get to right here today. Thank you.